Qatar Al Udeid Air Base. In the Middle East, the tiny Gulf nation of Qatar hosts one of the most important and sprawling U.S. military facilities, Al Udeid Air Base. Built in the 1990s and expanded in the 2000s, Al Udeid has grown into the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. It currently hosts around 10 to 11,000 U.S. personnel, plus additional coalition and NATO personnel at times, and serves as a forward headquarters for U.S. Air Force Central Command. Strategically located only about 150 miles across the Persian Gulf from Iran, Al Udeid is a critical hub for air operations covering Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and the broader region. The base features a 12,000-foot runway and extensive ramp space, capable of handling all types of aircraft. It regularly hosts squadrons of U.S. fighter jets, aerial refueling tankers, cargo planes, and high-end assets like surveillance drones and AWACS command aircraft. Notably, Al Udeid has also deployed heavy bombers. For instance, B-1B Lancer strategic bombers have been rotated through the base during periods of heightened operations against ISIS and the Taliban. The core of Al Udeid's importance is its command and control role. The Combined Air Operations Center, or CAOC, pronounced CAOC, at Al Udeid is essentially the nerve center for coordinating U.S. and Allied air campaigns across the Middle East. From a windowless high-tech floor, military personnel monitor live feeds and manage air sorties 24/7, directing strikes, surveillance, and refueling missions in multiple conflict zones. This makes Al Udeid indispensable for rapid military response in the region. However, housing such a major U.S. base is also a political statement by Qatar. The Qatari government built and offered Al Udeid to the U.S. in part to guarantee its own security, especially after seeing neighbors like Kuwait invaded in the past. The presence of the base has not been very controversial within Qatar itself. In fact, Qatar has often been eager to showcase its strategic partnership with the U.S., but it has factored into regional politics. For example, when Qatar fell into a diplomatic rift with other Gulf countries in 2017, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others imposed a blockade, the presence of Al Udeid was seen as one reason the U.S. maintained strong ties with Qatar despite pressure from the blockading states. Overall, while not as publicly controversial as some other bases, Al Udeid is a linchpin of the U.S. military posture in the Middle East, illustrating how even small nations like Qatar can host outsized military assets that project power across an entire region. Turkey Incirlik Air Base. Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey has been a cornerstone of US and NATO military operations in the region since the 1950s. Situated not far from Turkey's Mediterranean coast, Incirlik's location is highly strategic. It's within relatively easy flying range of the Middle East, the Caucasus, and even parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The U.S. Air Force operates out of Incirlik under an agreement with Turkey, and it has traditionally hosted around 1,500 U.S. personnel, though numbers fluctuate. During the Cold War, Incirlik was a forward base for U.S. reconnaissance flights and nuclear deterrence. Today, it continues to play a crucial role in regional conflicts. For instance, Incirlik was a key staging point for coalition air operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria in the mid-2000s, including serving as a launch site for drones and fighter bombers. The base features a 3,000-meter runway and extensive storage facilities. Significantly, Incirlik is widely believed to house approximately 50 U.S. tactical nuclear bombs, B-61 gravity bombs, as part of NATO's nuclear sharing program. These weapons are kept under U.S. control, but would theoretically be delivered by Turkish or other NATO aircraft in wartime. Their presence has long been politically sensitive. Incirlik Air Base has been at the center of several controversies, often reflecting the roller coaster relationship between Washington and Ankara. One major concern is the security of the nuclear weapons stored there, especially given Turkey's internal and regional volatility. During a failed coup attempt in July 2016, Incirlik was thrown into chaos. Turkish authorities arrested the base's Turkish commander for allegedly sympathizing with the coup plotters, and they cut off power to the base for several days. US operations were halted until things stabilized. This incident raised alarm in Washington about the safety of the nukes and the reliability of Turkey as a host. Some in the US even advocated withdrawing the bombs after that. More broadly, Turkey's strategic decisions have created friction. For example, Turkey has at times restricted US use of Incirlik or threatened to shut it down in political disputes, such as when the US refused to extradite a cleric blamed for the 2016 coup or during disagreements over US support for Kurdish forces in Syria. Turkish public opinion has also been wary of the base. In the 2003 Iraq War, Turkey's parliament refused to allow the US to use Turkish territory to open a northern front, reflecting domestic opposition to becoming too entangled in US wars. Additionally, as with other bases, there have been occasional incidents, like local protests against drone strikes or surveillance flights from Incirlik. In summary, Incirlik Air Base is a linchpin for US operations near multiple conflict zones, but it comes with geopolitical headaches, exemplifying the balancing act of deploying forces in a country where the alliance is crucial but not always smooth, and where American military assets could become pawns in diplomatic disputes. Diego Garcia, British Indian Ocean Territory, Chagos Archipelago, perhaps the most extraordinary and arguably the most controversial US military base in the world, is located on Diego Garcia, a remote tropical atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Diego Garcia is part of the Chagos Archipelago, which was under British colonial rule. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the indigenous people of the Chagos Archipelago, the Chagossians, were forcibly removed from their homeland to enable the construction of a US military base on Diego Garcia. Here's the background. As the UK prepared to grant independence to Mauritius in the 1960s, it carved out the Chagos Islands as a separate colony, the British Indian Ocean Territory, or BIOT, in 1965, specifically to retain control for strategic reasons. In secret agreements, Britain agreed to lease Diego Garcia to the United States for a base. Between 1968 and 1973, the entire Chagossian population of Diego Garcia and surrounding islands, numbering about 2,000, was expelled. They were deported to Mauritius and Seychelles, often with little more than the clothes on their backs, and were given scant compensation. Many lived in poverty and exile, and generations have struggled with the trauma of displacement. The atoll was then cleared for US use. The Navy built a sprawling base, including an airfield and port facilities. The plight of the Chagossians remained little known for decades due to official secrecy. However, over time, the truth emerged, and it has since been condemned by numerous international bodies. In 2019, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion declaring the UK's separation of the Chagos Archipelago from Mauritius unlawful and calling for the islands to be returned. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution echoing that and set a deadline for the UK to withdraw. The UK, backed quietly by the US, ignored these actions, maintaining that its sovereignty over the BIOT and the US base lease remain unchanged. In 2023, Human Rights Watch went further, labeling the expulsion of the Chagossians and the continued blocking of their return a crime against humanity. The US base on Diego Garcia is highly strategic and shrouded in secrecy. Its location is essentially at the center of the Indian Ocean, equidistant from Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. This allows the US to project military power across a vast radius. Diego Garcia's facilities include a large runway capable of handling B-52 bombers and other heavy aircraft, extensive fuel and weapons storage, and a deep-water port that can host naval vessels and even submarines. The base has been crucial in several conflicts. It served as a launch point for US bombers during the 1991 Gulf War, again in 2001 for the air campaign in Afghanistan, and in 2003 for the invasion of Iraq. B-1S, B-52, and even B-2 stealth bombers have been deployed there, given its secure and remote location. The island's remoteness has also led to speculation about other uses. Some reports suggest that during the CIA's extraordinary rendition program, detainees might have been held or interrogated at a secret facility on Diego Garcia, or at least that aircraft carrying prisoners refueled there. Both the US and UK have been opaque about these claims, admitting only that rendition flights landed there on a couple of occasions, but denying any detention facility. The secrecy and inaccessible nature of Diego Garcia, permits are required to even approach, fuel such suspicions. The base is also believed to host pre-positioned weapons and possibly even nuclear arms. For the Chagossians and Mauritius, the base's existence is bittersweet. It undeniably has strategic value, but it came at the cost of an entire people's displacement. As of now, the US lease, a US-UK agreement, has been extended to at least 2036. Diego Garcia stands as a stark example of Cold War geopolitics overriding human rights. Its very creation was a controversial act that continues to draw condemnation, even as the base remains a linchpin of America's global military reach. Germany, Ramstein Air Base. Germany hosts the largest number of American military bases and personnel overseas. This presence dates back to the post-World War II occupation and the Cold War, when West Germany was a frontline state against the Soviet Union. Ramstein Air Base in southwest Germany is the centerpiece of this presence. It serves as headquarters for US air forces in Europe and NATO's Allied Air Command. Ramstein supports a massive military community of over 50,000 Americans, troops, civilians, and families in the Kaiserslautern area. Nearby is Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, the largest US military hospital outside the United States. Ramstein is also a major logistics hub. Its runways and cargo facilities support US operations across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. For example, during the 2021 Afghanistan evacuation, Ramstein was a critical transit point for thousands of evacuees, temporarily housing them before they moved onward. Despite its importance, Ramstein Air Base has been at the heart of controversy in Germany. In 2015, reports revealed that Ramstein was involved in supporting US drone strike operations in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Signals guiding drones were relayed via Ramstein's satellite links, meaning lethal strikes outside declared war zones were facilitated from German soil, allegedly without the German government's full knowledge or consent. This sparked public outcry and legal challenges in German courts by human rights groups and families of drone strike victims. The lawsuits argued that the German government should stop the US from conducting drone operations from Ramstein, but German courts ultimately ruled that the government had limited obligation to intervene. The incident underscored how host nations often have little control over US activities on bases within their borders, raising sensitive questions about sovereignty and accountability. Cuba, Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. The US naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, is America's oldest overseas military base and also one of its most controversial. Established in 1903 after the Spanish-American War, the base's legal foundation is a peculiar lease agreement between the US and Cuba. Under that agreement, later reaffirmed in a 1934 treaty, the US obtained the right to use 45 square miles of land and water at Guantanamo Bay indefinitely, so long as it pays an annual rent and does not abandon the property. The annual rent is a token amount, around $4,000 to $5,000, which the US still sends every year as a check. However, since Cuba's 1959 communist revolution, the Castro government has refused to cash these checks, viewing the US presence as illegitimate. In Cuba's eyes, Guantanamo Bay is occupied territory, a vestige of US imperialism, and the Cuban government has repeatedly demanded its return. The US has consistently refused. Because the lease has no expiration date and requires mutual consent to terminate, the stalemate continues. This makes Guantanamo an anomaly, a US-controlled enclave on Cuban soil, maintained against the host nation's wishes for over 6 decades. Guantanamo Bay gained international infamy in the 21st century for a specific part of the base, the Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp. After the September 11th attacks, the US opened a high-security prison camp there in January 2002 to hold suspected terrorists, reasoning that detainees kept outside US sovereign territory would have limited legal rights. The Bush administration argued that Guantanamo detainees were not entitled to protections of the U.S. Constitution or standard prisoner of war status, given their location and the war on terror context. Over the years, the U.S. detained roughly 780 individuals at Guantanamo, most without formal charges or trials, labeling them enemy combatants. At its peak around 2003, the prison held about 680 men from various countries. Incidents of harsh interrogation techniques at Guantanamo, including water-based interrogation, extended isolation, and other aggressive questioning tactics methods, were documented, drawing worldwide condemnation. Legal battles over detainees' rights went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which eventually ruled that prisoners did have some rights to challenge their detention. Nevertheless, as of 2024, the facility remains open. The vast majority of detainees were transferred out during the Bush and Obama administrations, but about 30 prisoners remain. Only 16 of the total ever held there have been formally charged with crimes. Even fewer have been convicted by the special military commissions set up to try them. Many cleared for release detainees languish because of difficulties resettling them. International human rights organizations have lambasted the Guantanamo prison as a violation of human rights and international law. Citing indefinite detention without trial, it has been called a legal black hole and a stain on America's global reputation. Successive U.S. presidents faced domestic political obstacles in closing the facility. For instance, Congress blocked moves to transfer detainees to prisons on the U.S. mainland. So the camp persists, symbolizing the excesses of the war on terror. Guantanamo Bay, once just a colonial-era naval coaling station, is now synonymous with one of the most contentious aspects of U.S. foreign policy. It highlights how a military base can become emblematic of broader ethical and legal debates. To see how every Special Forces unit is organized and what makes them unique, check out our deep dive. Every Special Forces unit in the U.S. military explained in detail.